There's no relays operating the lights. If I look at the circuit diagram, you have this brown wire which leads, in my case, it leads from this set of connectors over here and not from the starter solenoid because I don't have one. That leads to a junction there, and that junction is the plug and socket switch panel, which is under the dash somewhere. I don't actually know where it is. That feeds the side and headlight switch. When it comes on, there's a feed here that goes off to the side lights. But then there's this feed here, which is blue and green, which goes off again to that panel under the dashboard somewhere. And from there, it leads down to this double snap connector. And then that blue and green leads to this junction here. That junction is the plug and socket junction in the engine bay. And there's 3 sockets, I think, in the engine bay. 1, 2, 3. So that is the engine bay socket. And from there, it comes off as, again, a blue and green and ends up at the fuse box. My plan is to disconnect this connection in the fuse box here, this blue and green wire. Currently feeds the power to the left and right hand dipped, and then insert a relay, and that way the switch here will only be supplying 1 amp just for the switching mechanism on the relay. And the same for this blue and white wire here. For me here, need to gain access to the fuse box. And what I'm looking for is a blue and white wire. Well, that's certainly a blue and white. And a blue and green wire. So that one, that's actually, although it looks blue and white, I think I've determined that that's blue and slate. So that's left-hand main beam, blue and slate. Left-hand main beam, blue. Right, so that's actually the feed from that fuse to the left-hand main beam. It's not that one. So that's blue and slate, which looks very much like blue and white. So this blue and green wire coming out here, I've marked already in my previous rewirings as power to light switch. I think what it means is power from the light switch, not to the light switch. From the light switch, which is this blue and green that goes to the fuse. So I've identified those 2 quite thick wires, and it's in those wires that I'll be inserting the relay. I'm going to remove this wire here to that circuit breaker with the blue and white wire feed there. It feeds 2 fuses via a jumper, coming off with a blue and slate wire and a blue and white wire. This is the blue and white wire which feeds that connector there. That circuit breaker is then jumped to this circuit breaker here. I'm going to mark those on the top of the box. And off this circuit breaker comes the blue and slate wire, and then off that circuit breaker next to it comes this blue and white wire, and they feed the main beams. And looking at my fuse box, that would be correct. Is the right hand side main beam headlamp And this one here is the, although it doesn't say it because it's worn off, that's the left hand side headlamp main beam, and I'll mark those up now that I know exactly what they are. For the blue and green wire coming into the fuse, that's marked as blue and red, but this doesn't seem to have a marking on it. It should be marked as blue and pink. If you look on this from the Jensen Monday Club, the colour codes, blue and pink is from the fuse to the left hand dip headlamp. That's that one there. So blue and pink, that wire should be blue and pink from the fuse to the left hand dipped beam. Having established the correct colours here, on my car, this wire here and this wire here have been connected the wrong way round. And the blue and pink wire should be connected to the left hand dipped beam, and it is the blue and red wire that should be connected to the right hand dipped beam. So I'm going to reconnect those two, move them over to their correctly marked circuit breakers. So these two are now in the correct location. With these two wires disconnected, these are from the switch, they're long enough to go outside the fuse box here. So I'm going to find a way of connecting the relays in this location. In terms of wires and amperage, it's quite complicated. This is a standard 30 or 40 amp you buy off eBay. These wires are 16 gauge. Generally 16 gauge are regarded as being suitable for 10 amps, but they will take 30 amps. It just depends on the length of the connecting wires. These two wires don't really matter too much because they're only going to take 1 amp. They're the switching wires for the relay, but this is power in and power out. If I have wiring here that's capable of taking at least 20 amps, then I'm going to be on the safe side. I chose to put in relays that had 14 gauge wire for both the power supply and power out. I think in reality, the bog standard relays you buy, 30 amp or 40 amp relays that have 16 gauge wire, then they will cope. The dipped beam are 2 bulbs at 55 watts, and 55 watts works out at 110 for the pair. Divide by 12, that's 9.1 amps. The same goes for my main beams. They're also 55 watts, and the driving lights are also 55 watts each. 16 gauge, that'll be plenty, because the distances involved for me are only a few inches in practice, so theoretically they could cope with up to 30 amps. Because I'm bringing in a power lead from one side all the way up to the relays. I'm going to attach them there. One's going to one side the fuse, and the other will pick up on, say, this wire that was attached to the fuse. So the distances aren't great. I'm going to replace the existing bulbs with these bulbs. What they say is, in reality, you don't need to go above 55 watts, because now, with technology the way it's gone, these will produce something like 1.5 times greater light than the old 55 watt bulbs, which are probably in there. This is the wire that comes from the switch, and I've cut it here at this point. And what I will do is I will attach that wire back onto that point there where it came from originally. So that will become the power in wire. This is no longer a power in wire, this is part of the switching wire mechanism. So these two I will attach together, and that one there I will attach to that. So that is now the power out wire, which will go back and connect to the fuse. So it keeps the original wire coding on there. Where I cut it, I will attach that to the switching wire now. This wire is the power out. I'll just reattach that. To that circuit breaker. That's the signal wire. This one now has to be connected to a power in from that fused box over there. And then this is connected to an earth. I have inside there a nut and bolt earth arrangement. And the idea is, when I've done this one in the same fashion, that the two 40 amp relays will just lie in there. This is redundant. Now, I've also decided that I'm going to attach another relay. It's not going to be connected to anything at the minute, but it will be connected to some driving lamps that I have, which I haven't installed, but I might as well put it in at this stage. This is the feed wire that's going to come from connector box over there, fuse box. So this is the supply block. That's the lighting circuit. There's a brown wire that goes off. That brown wire was the existing wire, and that goes to the light switch, which will now only have to deal with a few amps. Attached to the same fuse is now this power supply, which feeds three relays. One relay for dipped, one relay for main beam, a third relay for the yet to be installed driving lights. That power supply wire that goes across under here and supplies the relays over the corner there is 10 gauge. If all the lights are on, there would be 6 55 watt bulbs. That gives 330 watts. Divide by the voltage 12. So the total draw would be 27.5 amps through this wire if all 6 lights were on at the same time. 10 gauge wire will cope with 30 amps over a 7.8 feet. The distance here is about 5 feet, and it's only got to cope with 27.5 amps. Maybe this is wrong, but it's how I've always done it. To join all these together, the power wires, all I've done is twist and then solder those wires, and then I'm going to solder this input wire to those wires. This is it finished now. I have 3 relays in place. These 2 relays are fused from the fuse box. This relay has its own separate fuse because it's going to be for the addition of driving lights. They're all connected. Blue and white wire, which is connected to the white signal. That leads off back down through the loom to the switch. There is another wire there which is the blue and green wire, and that also leads back to the switch and is connected to the white switching wire. The blue wires on these relays are connected to the circuit breaker here. The green and blue is connected to the circuit breaker there, and is also attached to this blue wire coming out of this one here. When I operate the switch inside the car, that sends power to the white lead, together with the black lead, which is earth. That will switch on the electromagnet. The electromagnet, once switched on, will connect the power in on these red wires to the power out, which are the blue wires, and the power out then changes from blue to the appropriate blue and white or blue and green wires, and then they're connected to the circuit breakers there and there. And then the power out from the circuit breakers goes to the lights. I haven't put the new bulbs in. That's dipped beam, and that's main beam. They're now all operating via these relays, dipped and main beam. The final test was really to make sure that the cold air duct fitted properly, which it does.